I'm Brent Nelsen. Welcome back to Tocqueville Talks. I'm here with my co-host, Beth L'Arrivée. How are you today, Beth?
I'm doing well.
You're a little stressed, I know, because you've got to put a commencement on for Rosary College, huh?
That's right. Commencement is tomorrow. First one, inaugural commencement for the class of 2026.
And Furman is putting on its 200th or something, I don't know, 200th anniversary. I guess we've had 200 graduating classes. Probably not.
Commencement in the 200th year of Furman University.
There we
yeah,
go.
That's it. And that voice, in case you don't know, is Dr. Jim Guth, a longtime professor. How many years? 56?
53 years.
53 years. 53 years at Furman University in the Department of Politics and International Affairs. And, of course, if you look at our brochures, you see his face on the back as our senior distinguished scholar in the Tocqueville Center. And we're actually proud to have you as part of the Tocqueville team. And if you don't know this, I may be director, but Jim is my mentor. I bounce everything off of him so that I don't make really bad mistakes. So I appreciate that very much. But Beth and I are here today to talk about just kind of rounding up all the different speakers that we had that influenced us, impacted us a little bit. And we won't run through the whole gambit right now. But Beth, why don't I just turn it over to you. Who impacted you the deepest? You were interviewing each one. Which podcasts seemed to go well for you? Who stands out?
Yeah, so I would say I think this was maybe before we started the recorded podcasts, but in the fall when we had John Tomasi for the Crisis in American Higher Education event, I really enjoyed meeting him. He's president of Heterodox Academy. I never had a chance to meet him. But what the work they do there with academic freedom and dialogue in classrooms and presenting alternative viewpoints touches a lot on my own work, which is in the history of political philosophy, freedom of thought, conversion of the soul to the philosophic way of life, and how to manage the fact that we all grow up politically habituated to certain opinions that we don't understand the original arguments for or the alternative ideas to. And so that was really enjoyable for me to see him come out and do, and it was one of the On Discourse events that the Tocqueville Center does in coordination with another program here at Furman called On Discourse, which is devoted towards viewpoint diversity. And to see him running, it wasn't just like a lecture where the students show up and they listen and maybe there's a bit of a Q&A at the end. It is really a conversation throughout. So the speaker says sort of a 15-minute intro, and then the audience breaks up into small groups and gets to chat amongst themselves, talking about a series of questions that have been, usually you have chosen them, Brent, and so we get to talk, and that was great because not only do it, I get to hear the speakers talk, but I get an opportunity to talk to just random people in the audience. And so that could be anyone from a student at Furman, a Tocqueville Fellow, or maybe a not Tocqueville Fellow. Maybe they're a Beaumont,
Beaumont Fellows.
Beaumont Fellow. Or it could just be, like a random Furman student, or it could just be a community member. So it might actually be sometimes, there's lots of universities around here and colleges. So sometimes it's other faculty that I know from other places that I get a chance to see, but, to actually have an intellectual conversation briefly with them. Or it's the OLLI people as well that Tocqueville Center has a partnership with. So.
And those are generally retired folks who are part of our lifelong learning program at Furman, and they have become quite enthusiastic supporters of Tocqueville because they love the conversation too.
Yeah, and they love to hear the perspectives of the younger generation and to try to understand that better. And then it's so great to see the younger students, reciprocating that. And I've always been a fan my whole life. I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's how I grew up, but I love multi or intergenerational interactions, conversations. I've always preferred to be amongst groups where you have people of all ages, ranging from babies to the elderly. And so I feel like that's reflected in those conversations. And So yeah, that was a really good conversation. Oh, and the other thing that really stood out to me from that event was it really seemed to elicit, it sparked something, I feel, in the students where they became genuinely engaged in what they were talking about, because the conversation was just kept going after the event ended. And I was seeing like these groups of students standing around and talking to each other after the event had ended, and that was really encouraging, because in my own undergraduate experience, that is what I remember standing out as being the best moments, is when you got a chance to stick around afterwards and really get more into depth with the ideas. And then the other event I would say that really stood out to me was the rescheduled one with Phillip Muñoz, partly because I know him from Notre Dame, and so he's something of a friend, but also because of the content of his talk. It was the most clear account of the argument for the unified executive that I have ever seen or heard. And he had an amazing slideshow set up. So he had a great PowerPoint presentation, which had these perfectly pulled quotes from the headlines. So that's one of the things I loved about it, was that he didn't start from a sort of abstract theory of the unified executive and kind of then just go through the original founding documents, although he did do that, which was, great. But he didn't start with it. He started with kind of ripped from the headlines. So he started off with an account of how, well, of course, we see in the headlines today people accusing Trump of exceeding his executive authority. And then he goes back. He's like, but if we look backwards, we could see the exact same thing said about Biden. And if we go backwards, we could see the exact same thing about Obama and Bush. And so it was, he really perfectly drew, I think, the students into, this question of the unified executive, which you might think is sort of an artifact of these curious things we call the Federalist Papers or something like that. And this argument that was relevant at the founding, no, this really matters. And then the other thing I really liked about it is he really made clear the give and take of how you answer that question, so that if you want to answer it in the direction that the executive authority, the unified executive presents too strong of the executive branch against the other branches of government, and you maybe want to have something intervene with that. So maybe you want to create an independent committee. Maybe you want to have Congress create an independent committee made up of aspects of the judiciary or the legislative or the executive, and kind of counterbalance against the president. Well, then you're going to have a problem with accountability, because now when the executive does act, it's going to make a trade-off and something goes wrong, who do you blame now? And so I thought he really drew out well the different issues that we face when we're trying to answer this question, and the different sort of forces in the reality of how politics operates. That's what I loved. Okay, so I know Jim wants to jump in and make the counter argument, but before we get there, if we do, I will say that was a very strong presentation. We needed Yuval Levin, who could not make it, to present the counter argument. And that's where snow just got in the way, so that we couldn't have that actual dialogue between two people who understand the issues well. Jim, what do you think? What struck you as important this year?
Well, I especially was interested in our European session on the European Union, in part because it took me back, let's say a few decades to my origins at the University of Wisconsin, where one of the first political science courses I took was on European integration. It was at a time when there weren't many courses like that, and Stuart Scheingold was innovating in the study of the European Union, and Leon Lindbergh was there as well. And we had quite a little group of people who were interested in European economic integration. And having our session with Gary Marks and Lisbeth Hugi and Matthias was really very stimulating to me, in part because you and I are working right now on some of those issues, and especially given the fact that American and European relations are very fraught at the moment, and it's very intriguing to look at both sides of the coin, so to speak, and and look at how the European Union is reacting not only to our strategic differences, but also to economic differences, and to look at the internal debates within Europe over the direction that the European Union is going to be taking. And I also fits in with some of our current research on populist parties and that sort of thing. And I think especially Gary Marx and Lisbeth were very good on talking about the importance of differentiating among these parties. We had a session a year or so ago where we had a couple of people who wanted to lump all these different political movements in Europe together into one kind of unified block of bad people. And this was, I think, a refreshing change of people who are looking to see all of the nuances and the differences among the various political alignments in the European Union right now. And I found that especially interesting, looking at those things myself at the moment. And it's also interesting to think about how those compare to the United States. One of the questions I'm looking at right now is whether or not these movements across national boundaries, these populist right movements like MAGA in the United States and the Reform Party in Great Britain, which just had a very good local election session in Great Britain, and the various European right-wing parties, if there's any real potential for the kind of internationale, if you will, that the communists and the socialists and some other political, or the Christian Democrats really used to have, or whether those parties, just by their very nature as nationalist parties, are irreconcilable. And we have some evidence on both sides. We see a lot of coordination at the intellectual level among these groups, but on the other hand, we see a lot of national differences emerging. And so it's fascinating to look and see how the developments in the United States and in Europe are going to affect the relationships between the United States and Europe, and also to see whether or not the kinds of forces that are reshaping our party alignments across the modern Western democratic world have more in common than differences by nation. So I think that whole session was quite interesting and very stimulating for us and for our students, I'm sure, in looking at very important contemporary relationships.
And that tied quite nicely to the event we did on globalization and trade, because Joseph Bramel, one of our friends and somebody you've kept up with over the years, brought up some of the same issues when looking at the trade relations between the United States and the European Union, which still can't seem to get straightened out. The Europeans can't quite make, I guess, ratify the deal that they made with.
And the president has threatened to raise tariffs more if they don't ratify it quickly. So we'll see how that works out. The trade policy thing was very interesting. I think that in the presentations by Mr. Lincecum and his tariff opponent, so to speak, you had the clearest possible presentation of two different perspectives on the role of tariffs, and I think that was very valuable for students. On the one, a libertarian free trade position, very articulately presented, and on the other side, I think the best possible case one can make for heavier use of tariffs and other kinds of trade restrictions in the national interest. And I thought that kind of juxtaposition was especially valuable in educating our students about these conflicting positions, and as presented by two very articulate exponents of those perspectives.
Yeah, that was interesting for me too, because the students who especially latched on to the American Compass pro-tariff side didn't much care about the economics that were being talked about. They were very focused on the social goods that would come from a less globalized society, with the promise of stronger families and better working conditions for working class people and that kind of thing. So whereas our economic we have economic majors. We have some economics-focused students. They were all on Lincecum's side in the free trade. So we had real on-discourse when we were talking about those kinds of things as well. Well, I'll chime in here. I have a couple of personal things that were very important about this year. One was to meet Senator Ben Sasse, especially after, we met him before he made his announcement that he has pancreatic cancer. And now, of course, he's everywhere from 60 Minutes to his own podcast called Not Dead Yet, which is, chronicling his essentially his death in public, but also really bringing to light some really key issues that he is highlighting for, Americans in this particular time. What is our purpose in life? What are we living for? When it comes to education, are we forming people or just cramming heads full of knowledge, or maybe not even knowledge, trying to get them a job? And I thought those are some of the themes that carry over from our Crisis in American Higher Education event, but also are really illustrating some deep issues in American higher education. And now that he is kind of has a short time frame here, he's really cramming in a lot of good points to make. The other one was, of course, my own undergraduate advisor, Mark Amstutz, was here for foreign policy, for religion and foreign policy. And again, I suppose this comes back to education as well, but his constant refrain, you are learning things so that you can give to the world. Your talents are not your own. They're to be given away. And his focus on public service was something that we do here, but we don't do as much as he does. And for me, I always latch on to the people who want to go to grad school and things like that, but that's a very small percentage. Many more of our students are interested in some kind of public service, and so I'm trying to be reminded of that and remind students that their best goal is to serve others and the public good, not just themselves.
I think that's especially important when you have the kind of emphasis that we have in so much of the public discussion right now on the economic benefits of education. The Wall Street Journal the other day had an op-ed piece by a scholar saying that basically you had to just look at the prospective economic output of a college or university or a major to determine whether or not it should be supported by student loans. And I think that really is just getting the purpose of a liberal education backwards. And I think of education generally backwards. I'd extend it that it's not just our responsibility, but I think public universities at one time had a very clear understanding, going back all the way to the Land-Grant College Act, that universities were to serve a public purpose and not just the private interest of the individuals graduating. And I think we've lost a lot of that in the public discussion, and we're focusing too much on simply the economic rewards of a higher education. And we're neglecting public service. We're neglecting some of those occupations and pursuits and life goals that aren't wrapped up in the dollar sign. So I think those kinds of considerations that Mark raised were especially important, and especially important given the kind of discussion we're having in the public realm these days about the purposes of education and the cost of education.
Yeah, I remember one of the things Ben Sasse mentioned actually when we interviewed him last fall when he was here is he thinks that universities shouldn't be treating, the student, as insofar as a university does have a responsibility to prepare the student for the workforce, which he was very much in, the same vein as you, both, where that's not the primary purpose, but insofar as they do have a responsibility to prepare them for the workforce and for, economic endeavors, that they were failing because they were treating that as kind of one thing. And he's saying that's not the world we live in, is that we should be training students to be able to do, the first stage of their career, the second phase, and those two, the third phase. All three of those phases might look very different from each other, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read that Wall Street Journal article as well. And the ironic thing was that all the majors and even the schools that the administration supports are teaching, religious studies, philosophy, some of those things, and they are below the line that is supposed to be, kind of the standard for being a success outside of college. And so the very schools that they want to support are the ones that will probably die if Pell Grants are tied to professional outcomes, or particularly incomes. So lots of unintended consequences when it comes to that. Well, we have an exciting lineup coming next year as well. And so I hope next year when we wrap it up again, we'll also have some important people to talk about and events that took place. And we have a really good group of Tocqueville Fellows coming who are going to spend a lot of time arguing with each other, because they do come from very different backgrounds and different perspectives. But that's when you really learn what you think, when you have to articulate it to your peers and engage in argument. And we keep it civil, but we do want the issues to be talked through. Well, Jim, thank you for coming. And Beth, thank you as always. And we will have a few more of these this summer. But we're going to take a couple of weeks off in the future here and then get ramped up again in the fall. So thank you all. Goodbye. Thanks for listening to Tocqueville Talks. This episode was produced by Audrey Einhauser. Lucy Southwell provided administrative support. The theme music is called The Girl I Left Behind Me, a popular folk song in early 19th century America, here performed by Jacob Taylor Armerding. To learn more about our lecture series and events, our Tocqueville and Beaumont Fellows programs for undergraduates, and to listen to episodes, watch event recordings, or support our work, search on Google for the Tocqueville Center at Furman University. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, subscribe, comment, and share Tocqueville Talks on all your favorite listening services. And visit our YouTube channel for full recordings of past events and episodes. Until next time, goodbye.